politics and their culture intact, and they're able to instantly build based upon your consumerism. They can be Arabs who don't give a damn about you, but they come into your communities with their economics, their politics, and their culture intact, and they're able to profiteer on your confusion and your disunion. This is what we're talking about. You cannot do it without economics, politics in a systemic relationship. And the circle around the polarities involves systems. The inner circle inside the pyramid involves the inner analyses, the core spiritual values that keeps anything together. And your people were the first to master external systems development, where you pulled millions of people together in Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt, and you build an empire that sustained itself for 1,000 years in the great dynasty of the Old Kingdom, and then sustained itself for 500 years in the Middle Kingdom, sustained itself for another 500 years in the New Kingdom. These are the traditions your people put together, how you link economics, politics, and culture together to build for eternity. But as Dr. Clark says, we lost the concept of nation building. We lost the concept of empire building. We lost the concept of building for eternity. That's what Kemet gives us back. Our claim to fame. When the European didn't have a pot to wee-wee in, we had laid the processes for people raising themselves up. And if you want to understand the sweep of history, you understand it in that context. Africans laid the foundation for the systems analyses and the processes. Here is African culture and civilization, sustaining itself at high zenith 10,000 years ago with science, mathematics, philosophy, in living communities, agricultural science, etc. People with less cultural development come into contact with the Africans, and they produce a synthesis that helps them rise. People called the ancient Hebrews come into context of the Nile Valley, and they produce a synthesis after hundreds of years that becomes Judaism. People who became the ancient Greeks come into the Nile Valley. They didn't go north to the Swedes or to the Germans. They didn't go east to the Chinese. They didn't go west to the Spaniards. They went south into the Nile Valley. The ancient Greeks came to the Africans to sit at the feet of the Africans, to learn at the Great Lodge of Luxor, the Ephesus University Temple. This is where the greats of the ancient world went to sit at the feet of your Dr. Clarks, your Dr. Benz, your Dr. Chancellor Williams of ancient times. This is where Pythagoras went. If he spent 22 years in the Nile Valley, this is where he was educated. This is where Thales, Anaximander, and Anaxagoras went. That's why when you move into the African center, even Greek civilization and culture now becomes meaningful to you. You can even get excited about all of that. You can even get excited about Greek so-called plays and drama. When you know what the real passion play and drama was that they were copying. You now moving into the African center can get excited about pillared temples like this, because you know this is the prototype of all the other pillared temples. This is the prototype of the Lincoln Memorial down in Washington, D.C. This is the prototype of the Parthenon on the Acropolis in Greece. This is the prototype of Solomon's temple. This is the prototype of all those temples built by the Masonic orders and whatnot. This great building of the ancient world, built by your people. And in this building, each of these buildings represented your spiritual value system. Each pillar in this building was a moral and ethical principle. Each pillar not only stood to hold up the great building structure, each pillar represented a moral and ethical principle. So when the Africans deal with their institutions, they deal with the material and they deal with the spiritual. And they interrelate them to produce their structures, whether physical or material or moral or ethical structures. This is the beauty of what we have. All the European has is the material formation. And that does not allow you to have fullness. The Greeks have a pillar temple. It's called the Parthenon. But it is a war memorial to the Greek homosexual warriors and their victory over the Persians in Marathon, 494 BC. The Parthenon on the Acropolis in Greece is a war memorial. It is not comparable to your sacred pillar temple, which is a tribute to the God concept in everything in the universe. And you have the ability to perfect yourself into godliness. The perfectibility can be mastered by learning and processes of spiritual development. So you went to these institutions for 30 or 40 years to master, not 2 years to get a BA or 4 years to get a MA or PhD. You went and sat at the feet of the masters for years. And you had to transform not only your mind, you had to transform your spirit. You had to not only develop the tooling, you had to develop the mastering of socialization. You had to master your character development. That's what's missing in our schools. You go to schools for the tooling function. You need to go to schools for the combination of the tooling function as well as the socializing function, developing the concept of values, that you are a creature of God, a child of God, and that you have a mission and a purpose that's godly. That's why our African education will mean something to us, and we have to understand it. But just as the ancient Hebrews came in contact with the Nile Valley and put together synthesis, and the ancient Greeks came in contact and pulled together Greek civilization, and the early Christians come into the Nile Valley, and the first Christian nation becomes Egypt, Ethiopia, and later the Prophet Muhammad stretched out his arms into Ethiopia, and then the Arabs invade Egypt, and then he produced a synthesis that becomes the dynamism of Islam. You cannot have a knowledge of the human family without an African center. An African center will let you know what the Greeks were all about. An African center will let you know what Islam is all about. An African center will let you know what Christianity is all about. If you do not have it, you are miseducated. And let me go to the videotape and give you an example. This particular symbolism on this papyrus is the foundation of your Judeo-Christianity Islam. This is the judgment scene of Osiris, Asar. This is the genesis of the Greek passion plays and dramas. This was played out over and over again in the Nile Valley and similar plays to teach moral and ethical principles. Every child knew these dramas because this is the great hall of judgment where your heart is being weighed against the feather of truth. The scale of justice in the Western iconography and symbolism comes directly out of the drama of the great judgment scene. The scale of justice is our symbol, standing before the Supreme Court of the United States. So we'll not only take the pillars, we'll take the scale of justice, and we'll take the concept of moral and ethical values. We'll take the concept of judges standing in judgment, because you see at the top of this symbolism are the judges, holding the feather of truth to evaluate whether this brother's heart can be effectively weighed against the feather of truth so that he can inherit eternal life. Because the concept of duality polarity that I'm trying to get you to understand is at the basis of all life. The Africans had in reference to the concept of the soul. The soul had two parts, the ba and the ka. And they related it to the weighing of the heart. The death of one part of the soul meant that the other part could inherit eternal life. But you had to have that soul weighed against the principles of truth, the 42 African commandments. Dr. Venn says there were 147, but they institutionalized 42. If Moses was raised in the royal house of Egypt as a prince, then he was raised with this knowledge. If Moses was raised with this knowledge, when he went up to the mount, he did not go up empty-handed, empty-hearted, empty-minded. He went up with the knowledge of Kemet. And when he fashioned the 10 commandments, he fashioned them in the image of the 42. That's why you have to begin to understand. Look at this symbolism and you'll see not only the scale of justice and the weighing of hearts and the final judgment, not only the judges that will judge, but you see the Son of God ushering you into the presence of God. And before the Son does that, there is Tahuti or Tahudimos with the book of records, weighing whether you lived a good life. Peter at the pearly gates with the book of records. And then there is the Son of God ushering you into the presence of God. And in the presence of God, there is that female principle of godliness. So here you have the first institutionalized trinity for humankind. Aset, the mother principle, Isis. Asar, the father principle, Osiris. And Heru, the child principle, Horus. You have to understand what it is when you move into Kemet. You take everything back. And with that, you can reconstitute yourself. That's what our scholars were trying to say, and most of our scholars are not scholars for scholarship's sake. They're not publishing to get a place at the university. When Chancellor Williams writes, he writes serious scholarship, but with an objective of getting you to establish a meaningful program. So you're not going back in the past so you can stay there. You're going back in the past to retrieve it so you can understand and dissect your future, your present, so you can deal with your future. When Dr. Ben writes his book, he's not writing so we can hang around the pyramids and the temples. He's writing so we can grasp that there is a spiritual power there that's still alive. And you can use that spiritual power to carve out a future.